All right, so let's begin with today's lesson. We have two lessons for, well, this class, and well, this is the first one. Let's begin. Past continuous. It is a very simple tense, but we have to repeat. All right, remember that we're following the lessons and the contents that Pearson suggests, and we have to practice. All right. Again, I have to work on this on the basis of what you know, but as I'm just giving the classes like this, I have to just give the general class for general knowledge. That's why, again, I need to cover these lessons, even though they can be clear. I cannot recognize that, so I have to continue working with them. All right, one by one. Now, let's begin. Past continuous is just a tense in past, of course. The structure that we have for past continuous is very simple, right? I, he, she, it is conjugated with was. That is the conjugation in simple past of the verb to be with third person, right, or singular. And we, you, they is conjugated with were because that's the conjugation in simple past of be for plural or second person, right? And then you have the verb plus ing that grammatically speaking, it is named as present participle. Okay, so I was driving the car. She was studying for the test. Or we were driving the car. You were studying for the test. Okay, so the change that we got, again, it's very simple and it's only related to the verb to be as a possible conjugation, right? But here, more than just the past continuous, we have to understand that it's not used by itself, all right? It means there's no sense, there's no logic in using something like, I was studying for the test, but then what? Okay, you can simply say, I studied for the test. But if you choose to say, I was studying for the test, it is because something else happened afterwards or in between that action. That's why this tense is mainly going to use for, let's say, context, all right, for context. So we use past continuous for something which happened before and after another action. All right, in this case, of course, we're going to change this to that. All right, because it's too formal, kind of illogical, the other one. Now like that. Okay, something that happened before and after another action. So the same context. The children were doing their homework when I got home. Okay, so that's a good reason why you would say the children were doing their homework when I got home. But if you simply say the children were doing their homework, again, why are you saying it like that? You can simply say the children did their homework. And that's it. You're conveying the same information. You need to have a reason, a good reason to use the past continuous. And this is a good one. All right. And compare. It's not the same when you say the children did their homework when I got home. In the first case, as I said at the beginning of this explanation, this is the context. The children were doing their homework is the context. And in the middle, in between, right, this happened. But it means that the children were doing their homework was happening before. If you only use the simple past in both cases, it's like first I got home and then the children did their homework. Okay, it's like I got home, then the children did their homework. The children did their homework when I got home. Okay, so it's different. Even the meaning of this idea, just by using a different tense, is different, right? So take that into account, please. It is important to notice that by using this tense, we are using a context, and that changes the combination of possible tenses. Now, we use the past continuous to talk about actions that were happening at the same time. Now, this is with while, right? When you talk about simultaneous actions, right? Actions happening simultaneously, you have to use the past continuous in this case, right? Any continuous tense works in that way. In this case, we're talking about past. So I was driving, and at the same time, simultaneously, she was talking on the phone. All right. So again, when the idea is to show that two actions were happening simultaneously, we use the past continuous in both tenses, of course, and the best option is to use while. You can use when, yes, if it's clear. I was driving when she was talking on the phone. It is valid, but the word while is better. Okay, it suits better in this type of situation. So it's, well, actually it's advisable, right, to use while. He was looking at his textbook while we were taking a test, not the test, right, a test. So again, if we analyze this, when a simple past and while plus past continuous after the past continuous in both cases, in this case, this is the context and something happened afterwards in the middle, in between that action. Here, we're just talking about two actions happening at the same time, in this case, in the past, right? This happening over here. And that's it, all right? Now, the formulas, of course, are very simple. And once again, remember that anytime we talk about clauses, they can be, right, inverted. You can say past continuous when simple past, right? The children were playing when I got home. Or you can use the inversion. When I got home, comma, the children were playing. But remember, that's an important rule that we have to memorize. If we use when, right, at the beginning, we need a comma before the next clause, before the next idea that in this case is in past continuous. All right? So once again, the children were playing when I got home. When I got home, comma, the children were playing. And while for a combination of past continuous ideas. Two actions happening at the same time in the past. So the children were playing while I was talking on the phone. Or while I was talking on the phone, comma, the children were playing. And in this case, as both are happening at the same time, it doesn't matter if you change even the sentence, right? Because both were happening at the same time. I mean, there's no difference in that. But if you change, of course, the first one with when and the simple past at beginning and past continuous afterwards, that's not going to work. All right, it's very likely going to be a little bit different. And not all sentences, right, that are in simple past can be in the continuous form. That's also important to know. So in these cases, the simple past interrupts and the past continuous is the ongoing action, all right, that is interrupted or that precedes the other action. So this is what I was telling you. We can use when all the time. Okay, no problem. Even in the sentences with while, I said it, right? We can say when the children were playing when I was talking on the phone, for example. And it's good. As long as it is clear, it is obvious, it's great. Again, it is better to use while for that simultaneous action, but when it's not a thing that it signifies a problem. All right, so it says, okay, let's read. You can use when all the time if the continuous action and the punctual action are obvious. For example, I broke my leg when I was practicing in the park, but usually you have to say when I was practicing in the park, right, when I broke my leg. And again, in this case, it is going to be understandable, all right, because the context is going to be the continuous idea, right? You were practicing in the park. And what happens or interrupts that idea is breaking something, but in simple past and as a definite action because that interruption is fast, right? I was doing something when I broke my leg. It is not that you were breaking your leg. No, you broke it, right? And again, as long as that is clear, this possible combination or change in the order of the details using when in the middle, it's going to be okay. All right, again, I was practicing in the park when I broke my leg, or I broke my leg when I was practicing in the park. And you can change that in many ways because it is clear. I was studying for the test when you called me. All right, or you can say, you called me when I was studying for the test. Again, the idea is clear because this interaction of two elements in two different tenses, right? One in the past continuous and the other one in the simple past, is going to make that event always having this dynamic. All right, the simple past is the interrupter, the following action, and the past continuous is just the ongoing action. All right, that's going to happen anytime those two elements are combined and they are together. And again, the order can change, of course, as we were able to see, but the idea remains the same. So let's keep going. Related usage. This, all right, use of past continuous is very common at the beginning of a story. Now, it's like the context, as I said at the beginning. You are given a context and in between things happen, or happened in this case. So the other day I was waiting for a bus when this happened and this happened, right? So I can continue. So for example, the other day, comma, I was waiting for the bus or for a bus when I saw a very old and good friend, right? I called his name, right? And he got to listen to me. So we were having a conversation for some minutes when I saw my boss, right, passing by. And I can continue and continue. Okay, so in my story, I can choose to use the simple past or the past continuous on the basis of what's the context in that part of the story that I'm telling. Okay, when is it going to be a very definite element that I have to mention just with the simple past? Or when is it going to be just the context or the little context for something else that is happening inside my big story? All right, same last week as I was driving to work, this happened and this happened, and we were doing this, or I was doing this, and then this happened, and we were doing this and that, this person was doing that at the same time, but we didn't see this and that and blah blah blah. Right? So simple past, past continuous, the interaction following this logic. Okay, one being the context for the other one, or always the first action happening in progress in this case, and the other elements that happen afterwards. Now, we use it also for something that happened before and after a specific time. Actually, this is repeating the same idea that we covered at the beginning, right? Happened before and after. It means this is the context and something interrupts that or just happens there. It was 8 o'clock, I was writing a letter. All right, so you're just saying that at that time, you were doing that action, but that action started before and will finish afterwards. Okay, it's not that you wrote the letter at 8 o'clock. No, at that time you were already writing the letter. So it started before 8 o'clock in this case. And as you are, or you were doing that action at 8 o'clock, it's very likely that you continue, actually not very likely, you continue doing that because that's why you chose to use, sorry, the past continuous, right? So 8 o'clock is just a reference for something in the simple, sorry, in the past continuous, not simple past, in the past continuous that started before and that finishes afterwards. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Then, for something that happened again and again. Now here you have to decide if it is a good idea to use the past continuous or the simple past. Remember, because it feels like repetition in the sense of habits or routines. So when do you say, I studied, right, that career? Or when do you say, I was studying, right, for my test? And not with the logic of now, right? Of course, the first one is when you want to mention something that happened and that's it, definite, right? I studied. my career, or I studied for my test. You can know, let's make it the same, right? I studied for my test. I was studying for my test. I studied, right? Something specific that happened, and that's it. It's not going to be a routine action in this case, just going to be a definite action that happened, all right, at a specific time could be. But if you say I was studying for my tests, that's going to be the context of something, or you can make it as in this case as a repeated action. You know, during all those weeks, I was studying for my test after every class. Okay, so after the class, I got to study. After the class, I got to study. So repetition, if it deserves to have this emphasis, then you can use the past continuous in that case. Now, related to action verbs, remember that we have two main, right, groups for the verbs, the action verbs and the non-action verbs. We know that actions are easily used in continuous tenses, right? Running, uh, studying, watching, speaking, right? Those are action verbs. And non-action verbs, of course, they are non-actions. They are states, they are characteristics, qualities, right? For example, to have possession is stative, it's a non-action verb, right? Then you have be, that can be action, but sorry, but in most of the cases, it is non-action. I am Luis, I am 32 years old, and so on. So that's non-action. But in this case, we're talking about action verbs because we are relating these to past continuous. It has to be an action verb. We cannot use any non-action verb with, let's say, the past continuous. All right, we don't use, again, the non-action verbs in continuous tenses. That's very important to remember. Now it says with verbs which show change or growth. The children were growing up quickly. Her English was improving. My hair was going gray, and the tongue was changing quickly. All right, so again, all of these are action verbs because we can clearly see the progress of the action, something changing or growing, right? That's the case. And this is what I was mentioning. Let's reinforce this knowledge. It says, we do not normally use past continuous with steady verbs. All right, we use the past simple instead. So when I got home, I really needed a shower. It doesn't matter that at that moment, right, it was happening that, let's say, need. You never say, I was needing a shower, because you know that these verbs express a state, in this case, a need. And that's not an action, that's a state. So that's why we never say, I was needing, and we only say, I needed. Okay, so decide, please, what is the best verb in those cases? What is the thing that you can do as you are using past ideas, and when it is a good idea to use the simple past and when the past continues. Okay, so that's the first presentation. I'm going to open the next one. I'm going to change the presentation, and I'm going to drink something first, and we continue. All right, let's open it first. Okay, it is here. Please give me a minute. Again, I drink something just to be better with my throat. And we continue, and we finish with this lesson that is, again, it's interesting actually. It's not, it's short. Actually, it's a all right, very average presentation. It's not that short, but it can be covered all right quickly. So we're going to cover it, and with that we finish the class. But give me a second, I'll start the class in a minute. Okay, so let's cover the second and last presentation for today to finish the class. Okay, so models of preference. Again, this is interesting. It's very basic, but it's worth knowing these differences. So, would rather. Okay, this is a very basic way of expressing preference. Would rather, but it's very specific in one sense. And again, here mainly we're going to understand the difference between would rather or prefer in general, and then would rather and would prefer. Okay, those three elements are going to be mainly the elements we're going to cover. Let's start again with would rather, and it says, to express a preference when different choices are possible, you can use would rather. Because it is followed by the base verb of a verb, it functions as a modal auxiliary. All right, so first, you don't use this for general preference. All right, not for general preference. Only when you have alternatives, when you have options, choices. All right, that's the way in which you use would rather. I would rather stay home, or I'd rather play tennis. Okay, but again, you answer like that when someone asks you a question with also would rather, right? What would you rather do? Would you rather do this or stay home? Then you say, I'd rather stay home, or I'd rather play tennis. Okay, so you have options to choose from. In that case, you use would rather. So it's more specific to something, it's not general. Then separate options. Okay, when the choices are named, they are separated by them. So when they gave you options and you want to name those options, you use than to divide those elements. I would rather go to the beach than studying on such a nice day. I would rather be rich than poor. Okay, so the two elements being compared and the preference that you have for one of them is there, right? And those elements are divided and separated by then. Then someone else, this is interesting. And we have to be careful in this case because, again, even though, as you can see over there, you use the simple past, it is not past, this is present. We use the simple past because it's the name, actually, it's the thing we have to do when we use the subjunctive. The subjunctive is a possible conjugation of a verb that it's clear only in Spanish because we have, sorry, a very particular conjugation for that. We don't have that in English. As we don't have that in English, we have to use the simple past, okay, as a replacement. But it says, when you prefer that someone else do something for you, or in general, the formula is subject plus would rather plus subject again, let's say, all right, plus simple past tense. So, I would rather you drove home. You drove is present. This is not past. This is a present preference that we got. And drove is not simple past. We use the verb in the simple past, but this is subjunctive. This is a way of expressing present. Okay? I would rather you drove home now. I would rather she, and let's say, bought that purse. Okay? And again, the idea is not past, it is present. Then note, although the simple past tense, right, is used, this is just saying again what I said. In the above example, it refers to the present or future. Okay, so again, it is not past, it is present, and of course it can be projected to even future. And easy, if we want to change the previous idea to negative, we use negative. Of course, we have to follow the rules of the simple past, but again, this is not simple past, but grammatically speaking, we have to follow those parameters. So, when you don't want someone to do something, the formula is subject plus would rather plus subject plus didn't, because this is a negative simple past, right? And the verb in the base form. Same rules. I'd rather you didn't do that. I'd rather you didn't call me. I'd rather she didn't, what could it be? that she didn't watch that movie. Okay, and now the present or future, it is not past. And now, okay, having seen that, we have negative form of would rather. So if you say I would rather stay home, the negative is simply by adding not after would rather. So I would rather not catch a bus. I would rather not stay home, and so on and so forth. So let's take a taxi instead, right? And it says the subject and would are often contracted. Oh yeah, this is actual, right? But you say I'd rather, we'd rather, she'd rather, he'd rather, and so on, instead of I would rather, he would rather. In all the cases, we use only would rather. There's no conjugation there because this is a model. Models are not conjugated, right? So it is very simple. We would rather all the cases, but of course the contraction is going to have a difference in terms of how you pronounce it. And that's would rather. Remember, is when you have choices, when you have options, okay? I would rather do this than this. Now, prefer is not as specific, not when you have options. This is more general. Let's read it. To say what is generally preferred, you can use prefer plus infinitive or prefer plus gerund. Okay, as simple as that. So I prefer to eat home, all right, or at home, and I prefer eating home or at home, right? But what we're changing here that is important is infinitive or gerund. Both work with prefer. Remember that we would rather, because it is a model, we have to use the base form. I would rather do, I would rather go, I would rather eat at home. But you don't use base form with prefer. With prefer, you have to use infinitive or gerund. Okay, I prefer to go, I prefer going. I prefer to buy, I prefer buying. And again, this is not when you have choices or options. You can have, and you can compare your general, let's say, preferences like that, as you're going to see in the next part. However, again, it is not the main usage. It's not why you use it. You use this for general preferences. And of course, you can compare with your general preferences with other options. Okay, but it's not as specific, it's not as temporary. Something general, something that you always prefer, not only because you have those options. So the structures to show more than one object, okay, or one element that you prefer all over other objects, is divided in these three possibilities. First, prefer noun to noun. I prefer hot chocolate to tea. I prefer pasta to fish. I prefer Android to iOS, or something like that. So you are using this structure to mention two elements, but to mention your general preference, not your temporary preference among things that you have to choose from because you were given those options, right? No, it's your general preference, and just I don't know what could be the reason or what the reason could be, but just because you want to perhaps show the contrast, you use this structure. Then prefer plus, then here you use gerund. To gerund. I prefer drinking hot chocolate to drinking tea. I prefer staying home to going to a party. I prefer doing this to doing that. Easy, same logic, gerunds. And finally, when you use infinitives, it's a bit different. You have the infinitive, then you have rather than, and then you have base. So it says, I prefer to drink hot chocolate rather than drink tea. Okay, so be careful with this last one because it's like a combination of infinitive, then a very specific expression such as rather than, and finally drink tea, which again can create confusion sometimes, but it's not necessary to use that last one. I mean, the three of them work in the exact same way. Of course, the first one is not giving you the chance of using actions or activities, but in number two, you can use them as gerunds. But again, it's just to have some variety and ways to express the same idea. Now, that was prefer. Remember, what's the difference between prefer and would rather? Would rather more specific when you have options. Prefer is when you simply prefer that, generally speaking. Now, would prefer goes more to the side of what? Of would rather. It's more specific, not that general. So the structure would prefer is used to talk about what someone wants in a specific situation, sorry, not all the time, right? So similar to would rather, not to prefer, and is followed by infinitive verb or a noun. And here we use infinitive or nouns, okay? Those two. Would you prefer spaghetti or fish for dinner? You have options, right? More specific. Would you prefer to catch a bus or take a taxi home after the party? And you can answer, right? You can reply, I prefer to take a taxi home. All right? So, unlike would rather, prefer and would prefer are not followed directly by base verbs. It means verbs in the base verb. So they are not modals. Okay? I mean, this is just in terms of what's after this. After would rather, you have base verb. After prefer, you have infinitive or gerund. After would prefer, you have infinitive or noun. Okay, if you have that clear again, it seems that it's working great. Now, rather than will be used to divide the two possible things that you can mention. Something is bugging me there. And to divide those two ideas from the alternatives, from the choices that you got. So rather than, when we want to say that we would like to do one thing more than another, we can introduce the second thing with rather than, followed by an infinitive without to. It means the base verb. I'd prefer to go, yes, rather than, it's okay. I'd prefer to go skiing this year rather than go on a beach. So remember, I prefer plus infinitive or a noun. Then you have rather than, and then you have the base verb. Okay, I prefer to eat, I don't know, pasta rather than eat, what could it be? Okay, meat, red meat, let's say. All right, that's the logic. And that's it. Let's work in a very short recap. Okay, would rather, more specific, when you have options, alternatives, you use it with a base verb, affirmative, negative, and you can use it with other people as well. Using the subjunctive, it means the verb in the past, simple past, but only after the subject, okay? Not the verb after would rather. After would rather, you have another person. Then you have prefer, is more general because it's for general preferences. You can use it with infinitive or gerund, and you have ways to use or to show elements, not because you have them as part of what you need to use prefer. No, just because you want to compare. All right? And would prefer is more similar to would rather because it's more specific in a very specific situation, and you usually have options to choose from. You choose the option and you use would prefer to answer. And if you want to mention the two elements or more, you can mention that by using rather than to separate the first from the second element. And that's about it. All right, actually, that's it. Well, I'm going to finish the class here then. I got to cover the 2 lessons that we got for this unit that we're beginning. We have just one more. As always, tomorrow we will cover that lesson. I'm going to show once again something extra to practice. That's not going to happen every time. Well, those lessons actually are covered in many days, but it is practicing to see the usage to be sure that it is clear. As we don't have it, the only thing I can do is just show you that. But again, I'm going to try to look for some other details, even for speaking, right? Strategies for speaking, so that you can also take that into account. All right, but remember, as that's practical, the writing elements that I'm giving you, the speaking elements I'm going to give you, I just can show you and I can tell you how you can practice, but that's everything I can do. I cannot make you practice in class because again, and we're just recording the classes. I don't know why. It's supposed to be all right with the two of us here, but that's going to be it again. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you the next one. And just in case, again, I'm giving this schedule. I think you agreed with management, but I'm going to give the classes right at this specific time. Okay, so that's it again. See you the next one.